This rapidly changing economy, we almost feel like we don't have a foundation. Is there some things that parents can do to continue to build a foundation of good habits, even when they're kind of wavering in their own financial abilities?
Yeah, for sure. And I kind of lump this into my discussions on, I call it adaptability, just to, I think the young adult needs to understand why the world is so uncertain so that they can accept it, so that
Yes.
they're not surprised by it, you know? So I go into explaining why is there career uncertainty and why is there such change? So, you know, it's the technological changes, it's the global competition, it's the skills gap and wage stagnation, and just the demographics. You know, we had the financial crisis 10 years ago, but that kept people in the workforce who had been ready to retire. It made it harder for younger people to get a job. There's these dynamics. Right. So I encourage people to realize, and I know I always come across as kind of that engineer, analyst, black and white, a little bit of tough love, but it's like, this is it. You got to accept this, all right? The world is like this. You need to embrace change. So I'm saying not only understand and accept it, but you really should embrace it. Like you should know you're gonna switch jobs, and you might even switch careers, right? I was an engineer, then I was an analyst, and now I teach financial literacy. But you can't be surprised. You can't just kind of say you're a victim. I'm from Rochester, New York, right? And that's Kodak, right? Iconic brand, 100 years, and yet they went bankrupt, right? So when I first moved here, you know, if you started in Kodak at 20 years old, you assumed you were going to retire there in 30 years.
Right.
But that's not possible, right? So in my book, I talk about another book I read in the 90s that literally changed my life. And it's a book called Only the Paranoid Survive. And it was written by Andy Grove. He was the founder of Intel, you know, the computer chips.
Yeah.
And in the mid-90s, they committed the mortal sin of making computer chips. They had one that made a mistake, a mathematical mistake, and it was a corporate crisis. And out of that corporate crisis he wrote this book to reflect on it. And basically, he talked about once he was making a speech to his employees, and it was pretty brutal. He basically said, you know, look what we just went through, and that was our own doing, but look at the technology, the pace of technology change. So if a company doesn't know that they're going to exist in 30 years, how the hell can they make a 30-year commitment to you? All right. So his main line was, and it's harsh, but nobody owes you a job. All right. So I was reading this in the mid 90s. You know, I'm 30 years old, and I'm thinking nobody owes you a job. And his advice was, even if you work for a big company, take on the mentality that you're a sole proprietor. You work for yourself. You're an entrepreneur, and you're competing against millions of other similar entrepreneurs who their businesses themselves, which opens up all kinds of things to talk about, because
it sure does.
You need to be your own advocate. You know, you need to be your own brand manager. You need to embrace change. You know, you need to keep investing in yourself. And we've talked about some of this already. You need to constantly learn. You got to realize it's life skills beyond school, and it's addressing your weaknesses and building on your strengths. And, you know, so I was an engineer, then an analyst, and now this. But in reality, you know, it's not exciting enough to make a movie of. But if I went through my story in my book, because it shows that I did make a conscious effort to kind of evolve, right? I actually realized I was a bad engineer. I was not a good number crunching design engineer, even though my first job was, you know, the Naval Nuclear Program, the submarines and aircraft carriers. And those engineers were a lot smarter than me. So I adapted to become a field engineer, where I worked walking around these power plants and paper mills and steel mills. And I did develop a niche expertise, and I could help them run more efficiently, save energy, save water. But then I started to like finance and the stock market and picking stocks. So I got an MBA at night, which took some effort for sure.
Yeah.
But then I transitioned, but I covered as an analyst my old industries as an engineer. So I had that connection and contacts and genuine interest. But I was an analyst for 20 years in a competitive industry. So you have bad years where you're ready, you know, you're on the edge of being fired. So at those times, I had to consciously add value to the firm. And so I created a school and ran an internal school to teach new analysts and interns. And and developed a mentorship program. And that kind of led to this, where I want to be a mentor and about a different topic. So, you know,
Right.
it looks like I've made big changes, but I was always consciously evolving into the skills that I could
Mm-hmm.
most survive. You know, it's like my son always says with the NCAA tournament, you know, survive and move on. That was my goal, survive and move on, you know.